Hi folks, welcome to this week's tutorial. I'm Howard Jones and I upload these short tutorials on a weekly basis. They're sometimes clips from my live tuition Zoom classes, which run twice monthly, the first 2 Wednesdays of each month. And sometimes, as in this case, this is just a demonstration purely for you folks, my subscribers on YouTube. If you're watching this for the first time, if you're watching this as one of my videos for the first time, do please subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want notification of uploads as and when they go up each week, that is, sorry. So I have this photo that I'm working from. It's a lovely old farm in the UK, in South Wales actually, in the UK, and it's not far from where I live. And I was out painting this on plein air when the weather was good, back about 3 weeks ago. So on this occasion, as you can see, I'm working from the photo in my studio. So I'm just getting my drawing in here, and this is how I always start my drawings. I always start with the detail, if you like. I mean, I sort of see this painting as obviously being about the farm, so it makes sense to establish the main character of the scene first. If you look at the photo on the left, there is near my left hand a sheep, an individual, a sole little character there. I'm not sure whether I'll include this animal in the painting. I might save that for another occasion. Just really wanted to get across the main storyline, and which is the farm itself. There's a nice backdrop of trees that I'm about to sort of rough in with my pencil. And yeah, I like to keep a sculptural quality to my trees as much as I can. So I don't look to be painting every little branch that you can see, because there's a lot of trees there. I've no idea how many. Is there 20? Is there 50? They vary in size, height, shape. What is important is how they cut against the background sky. So my concern is always edges. But the trees, the backdrop itself, that dark green area, I just see it as one big shape with an interesting edge against the sky. So I'm just going in here with some water. There's a little bit of colour. I'll give you the colours as we go through. That was just a bit of water. I think there was a bit of contamination in the water, deliberately that is. It's just a little bit of warmth, probably a little bit of burnt sienna. You can just see that slightly warmness, that warm effect to that wash. This colour here is a mix of ultramarine blue and raw sienna. So it gives me sort of greenish. I mean, it might seem a bit odd to be putting a green-like colour into the sky, but I'll change it accordingly. I just wanted it to. I wanted to keep some continuity, and by just offering up a greenish wash in the sky, I can create that continuity. What's going in there is a colour called turquoise blue, and that's a transparent turquoise colour. And then I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine blue to that. So I loosely cut around the trees. I'm looking at the actual shape of the sky itself. A bit more ultramarine blue up here in the top right hand corner. I've adopted this technique that I refer to as delivery and distribution, by where I pick up my chosen colour, place it roughly where I want it, then I will make some adjustments to the paintbrush, i.e. how much water is in there, whether I need to clean the brush, and then I go back to the delivered paint and move it around to create my edges and shapes. I do a lot of this in detail and explain this in much further detail, much more refined detail in my regular lessons, which you can view. You can have a look at my program for 2022 and 2023, which will be uploaded onto my website soon. And these will be offered as live Zoom online classes. So I'm just creating some lower edges to some of those cloud shapes. That's mostly ultramarine blue. There'll be a little bit of burnt sienna in there. So there's a little bit. Hope you can put up with the few passages without my narration, without me talking. If I change anything radically, I will let you know what I'm doing here. So very wet in wet. That's a thirsty brush I'm using there, by where I will actually take more paint off. So and by taking paint off this way, you can create those smaller distant clouds that are lower in the sky, further away from us. Just warming up certain parts of the lower sky there. That's raw sienna. I think it's really important to work the wet in wet stages as much as you can. Keep the wet in wet work alive for as long as possible. And when you feel as though you've sort of arrived at the effect that you want, then you can move on. And I will often speed dry. Once I'm happy with that area that I've been working wet in wet, then I will speed dry it once I know it's where I want it to be. Now, although I'm going into the background here with blue, which is ultramarine blue, I think there's a little bit of turquoise blue in that as well. My intention here is to quickly be back delivering in a moment with some raw siennas to, of course, turn this area green. The raw sienna being a yellow, so the yellow going on top of the blue will of course create a green. And then it'll be very much a case of changing the tonal value. So that is actually a mixture. I've pre-mixed this up on my palette. That was ultramarine blue and raw sienna. Notice the brushwork, how it I define the edge the horizontal edge down here in the left hand side, but my brushwork for the canopy, the green canopy of trees behind, a lot of that sort of goes vertically, goes upwards, because I haven't pre-dried, force-dried with a hairdryer or anything at this stage. So I'm painting my green shapes against the still wet or still damp sky. I'm being very, very careful here to cut a clean edge around my farm building. The brush I'm using is a really cheap brush. I can give you a list of brushes that I use on a regular basis, and this is one I use from time to time. It was actually found in one of these bargain buckets in an art shop. I think I paid about 20 pence, 25 pence for it. I'm not sure. That's about a quarter of a dollar or something like that, or half a dollar. But I use a selection of brushes, as I say, that I'll be doing future tutorials on my preferred materials, paints, brushes, paper, etc. So do please try to follow me. If you can hit that subscribe button and the bell icon for notifications of me uploading my new videos. So this is where I am changing the tonal value. As you can see, I've made simply a much stronger mix here, and what this mix is a colour called Viridian Green with a bit of burnt sienna in with it. Viridian Green is very similar to phthalo green. It's transparent. It's clean, and I think a lot of people are put off using this colour because I think they make the mistake. I certainly made the mistake in the early days of thinking it was too bright a colour, it was too garish, and of course it was prior to me sort of knuckling down and learning a bit about colour theory and colour mixing. It's one of those colours that certainly does look way too garish, way too intense if you use it on its own. But the trick is to know you're mixing. So if you put in something warm with it, such as the colour that I'm using here, burnt sienna, is a warm colour, and they are opposites on the colour wheel. So you get a very natural looking green. So you may sort of ask, well, why don't I just buy a tube of natural looking green? There's plenty to choose from, such colours as olive green, sap green, and a multitude of other pre-mixed greens. But I always find the danger of pre-mixed greens is you have to be very careful how much mixing you do on the paper surface if you're using a colour that's already been muted with other colours, and that's the case of a lot of the pre-mixed greens. You will end up with a very muddy looking painting. If you start off with these cleaner greens, then you can keep your paintings looking nice and clean and free of too much mud. Be careful what I say about mud. Mud can be very, very effective when used correctly. It's just that it's too easy sometimes to end up with a muddy looking painting, and by keeping to clean transparent colours, and in this case the Viridian Green or phthalo green, I'm able to maintain a nice clean looking painting. So really going in now as the sky behind is really dried out. So there's a little bit of dampness there. Some of those marks that I made at the top of my trees, are still looking a little bit soft, so which tells me that there's still some dampness in the sky. This is a dry brush technique, and that involves loading the brush correctly and just being very gentle, skimming over the surface of the paper. I think painting, I'll say this for watercolor painting, but I'm sure it applies to other mediums, oils, gouache, pastel, acrylic. I try to keep my options open for as long as possible. So what I mean by that is, as you can see here, I'm not painting anything into the building, into the farm itself. I'm only painting basic shapes in the initial stages, because I find the minute you try to define your edges, if you try to define your edges and your shapes too soon, too early in the process, you're stuck with them, and often the first marks you make are just you're searching, you're looking for the best shape. So it's best to be tentative is not the right word, because tentative is a bit of a negative. I try to encourage my students to avoid being tentative, but it's all about it. Then therefore becomes about the quality of your brushwork, the brush mark. So you think more, paint less. There's no substitute, of course, for practice. So you need to get the sort of hours of painting and practicing your brushwork. But what I was saying a moment ago, keeping my options open. By working this way, I can do any adjustments as I get closer to the finish of the painting. So don't be too quick to complete a shape. Just rough in the basics in the initial stages. Now the colour I've used here is the phthalo green again, or the Viridian Green. They're both the same. And a little bit of cadmium yellow. And there's also a little bit of raw sienna in there. So I'm looking for that. If you look at the photo, there's a much brighter green in the foreground. So the addition of cadmium yellow, which is it's really an opaque colour in most brands. It works okay with the Viridian transparent green. It just brightens up the colour considerably. But everything you've seen so far has been painted with this one brush. I must say I usually use a bigger brush, even though this is just an A4 size piece of paper. My paper, incidentally, is a paper called Strathmore. Not surface, NOT, £140 or 300 GSM. But yeah, I'm sticking with this brush. I thought hopefully it'd be a useful note for people watching, that you don't have to be jumping around with brushes. I do, if you watch my other videos, I can use up to 4 or 5 different brushes in one painting, and on top of that sometimes I'll use other implements such as scraping tools. So look at how if you have a look here at how I'm changing the brush mark right down here at the bottom in the foreground. suggesting that there are some slightly taller grasses, as we'd expect to see that sort of scale. When that scale gets that close, that we know this sort of green organic vegetation grows vertically out of the ground, and I think that gives it a sense of scale. So the colour that I used down there was again Viridian Green, but with a lot more burnt sienna. You can see it has that slightly brown look, warmth about it. So I'm going back in with horizontal. The further away from the foreground I get, in other words, the closer we get to the farm building, things start to appear horizontal again. My brushwork goes back to it being mostly horizontal. Just using the handle of the brush. I like to try and catch the paint when you can just scrape out a couple of tree trunks and highlights. And so thirsty brush is needed for lifting out those highlights. So I've actually picked up a smaller brush for the first time here. This is just a natural fibre brush, size 5, round with a good point. Just a little bit of spattering. So I load the brush with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and I'll just, as you saw me doing then, I'll just tap a little bit of that paint onto the upper foreground. If you look at, and that's a bit of white gouache that I'm tapping into the foreground too, just suggesting these sort of wild dandelion flowers, wildflowers, dandelion heads, those sort of things. And if you have a look at that foreground, there's a lot of white paper in small sections, in small bits, where the brushwork that I've been using has missed the surface. This is intentionally done by skimming over the surface, leaving the white paper. I've decided to speed dry this so that we can start looking at putting some details in the farm building. And I'm making sure it's thoroughly dry for a number of reasons. I obviously don't want to be resting my hand on wet areas of the painting while I put the details in. And the sort of details that you'll see me start with here will be lines to the edge of the roof, the windows, doors, any sort of little bits of information in and around the property itself. We might expect to see small objects. They could be fence posts surrounding the property. They could be outbuildings, small storage facility, shrubs, all sorts of things. You know, just try to get into that mindset of what you'd expect to see around a farm building. The photo, I don't have a telephoto lens, but I mean I could zoom in and get some more information by zooming in with the camera, but I do sometimes think that we can rely too much on copying this sort of detail, and that can be that's not always good. It will force a very tight painting. So I prefer to study the photo and then paint what I think I can see, by doing that, you're making shapes that you're applying only the shapes that you can see as they are. In fact, it doesn't even matter if you don't know what they are. It doesn't matter whether it's a shed, a small storage building, some small shrub. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you're making those shapes that appear in that particular scene. So lines are there because they're usually recesses. They're windows, they're doors, they're the shadowy underside of an overhang, like a roof edge. I'm still with my little pointed size 5 round brush here. So this mix is very strong, and the colour mix itself will be ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. So you need to really cut down on the water. So I'm just going to speed things up here. So I'm dotting out a few of where I mentioned those little areas of white paper in the foreground. I see those as opportunities to perhaps suggest a couple of stones, maybe a few sort of animals resting on the field. Just using a mix of that turquoise blue and raw sienna for the roofs of my farm, and dropping a little bit of burnt sienna, quite weak, quite watery, while that roof is still wet, echoing that little bit of warmth down in front of the house in the ground area. Making sure, just making sure I get the temperature right for that roof. So a bit more attention to the trees, offering up a little bit more detail. It's what I was saying earlier about I can now put a little bit more detail into those bigger shape areas, because I've sort of, as you work your way through, you tend to be able to interpret these things better. And that's why I leave things that I mentioned earlier about keeping your options open for as long as possible. I've zoomed in there so you can get a better idea of the textures in the foreground. And I'll just need now to infer some sort of shadow effects on the building. You can see a few alterations I've made for aesthetic reasons, sort of artistic license if you want a cliche. I've added a window to the building. My building's slightly more conventional in its shape than the actual one in the photo. There's just a bit of shadow over this end. Which conveys a bit more depth. Again, this is more suggestion than statement. It's just things that might be there. They may be rocks, boulders that are sticking up out of the grass. A little bit of spatter of white gouache. little bit of white line to suggest perhaps a couple of those fences are picking up the light. And really, that's about it. So once again, I hope you've enjoyed this short tutorial. Do please remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want immediate notification as and when my new videos are uploaded. They are uploaded on a weekly basis. Even better still, if you could hit the share icon and perhaps pass these videos on to friends, colleagues, that would be fantastic. I do have a website that you might want to visit to have a look at my online tuition opportunities. They're easy enough to subscribe to over at Howard Jones Art UK. That's howardjonesart.co.uk, where you'll be able to find a full range of my activities, forthcoming events, etc. And you can also drop me an email via the website or leave comments, of course, below this video. Love to hear from you, and until next time, see you then.